I'd like to spend some time talking about directors. And so first, I'd like to look at some pioneering directors in pursuit of something called the actor's director. You're going to notice these are all old white men because that's sort of like what the history of film and theater have been about for the last 100 years. This first picture is of Anton Chekhov reading one of his plays to the cast and company of the Moscow Art Theater. And to his right, reading over his shoulder, is Konstantin Stanislavski, the legendary Russian stage director and teacher, who was known for creating what he called his system. It was later called the method. Stanislavski began as a character actor. He became a stage director. He founded the Moscow Art Theater at age 33 in 1896. His theater became famous. They toured the United States in the 1920s. He was an interpreter of the works of Anton Chekhov. Here is Maxim Gorsky, The Lower Depths, and other Russian playwrights, and he's known especially for his book in which he codified his system, his book entitled An Actor's Work. Now, I'm hoping you'll know Charlie Chaplin, one of the iconic figures of film history, comedian, acrobat, writer, director, producer, and music composer, and creator of the classic character, the Tramp. Chaplin was a British actor. He rose out of poverty as a musical vaudevillian. He was a comedian at age 19 in 1908, early in the 20th century. He was known for slapstick, combined with characterization, sentimentality, and pathos, which he revealed in The Gold Rush, his classic from 1925. Also, The Kid, and what some people feel is one of the greatest films ever made, City Lights. He directed 11 features, silent and sound, and countless silent shorts. His career spanned 75 years. He was presented with an honorary Oscar in 1977, near the end of his life, for his incalculable effect on motion pictures. I'm guessing you all know or have heard of Alfred Hitchcock. He was an influential British director and scenarioist. That is, plot writer. He began as a title card designer in silent films. He was never an actor. His directorial debut, was in 1925. He made 50 feature films, including classics like The 39 Steps, Vertigo, and Psycho, over 60 years, both in the studio system and later as an independent producer. He is known for his droll humor, suspense, themes of trust, montage, that is rapid cutting, and self-promotion. He received 6 Oscar nominations throughout his career, And he received the AFI's Life Achievement Award in 1979 and the Irving Thalberg Producers Award from the Academy in 1967. Now, Hitchcock was not an actor's director. He famously said to Montgomery Clift, this actor here, who worked with him in a film called I Confess, when asked how he should play the role, Hitchcock told Clift, "It's in the script," which that's true, not extremely helpful to an actor, but Hitchcock did most of his work in the preparation, and he put a great deal of work and effort into storyboards and scripts. And he was lucky in that he was able to find non-method actors like Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart, Grace Kelly, Ingrid Bergman, who were able to use the script and intuit what he wanted. So that's a lesson that a great director is not necessarily an actor's director. Stanislavski certainly was, but not Hitchcock. George Cukor was known as a woman's director. He was Katharine Hepburn's favorite. He also worked in the studio system. He began as the assistant on a tour, an assistant stage manager. He became a stage director, and he entered motion pictures as a dialogue coach. There's very little documentation about him having been an actor, but he was active as a director from 1930 through the early 1980s, 50 years. He got 5 Oscar nominations. He won Best Director for My Fair Lady in 1965. He made some 51 films, again in the studio system, where you don't have to look for a job. You work for a studio and they assign you one after the next to your projects. He was a great favorite of producer David Selznick. He specialized in comedies and literary adaptations and women's films, such as Little Women with Katharine Hepburn, Camille, David Copperfield, and he was the original choice to direct Gone with the Wind, the great film of 1939, one of the great classics in cinema. But if you look at this poster, if you look down under Olivia de Havilland's name, you'll notice that the director credit went to Victor Fleming. And that's because Clark Gable, who had been especially sought by Selznick as the star of Gone with the Wind, felt that George Cukor was giving too much emphasis to the women in the picture. And so he asked for Victor Fleming, his friend and reputed man's director, to take over the film. Fleming was pretty busy at the time. He was also working on The Wizard of Oz at another stage on the same studio lot, and would go back and forth between the two. Fleming began as an army photographer. He was a car mechanic. He was a camera assistant and cinematographer. So far as we know, never had an acting credit. He began working in 1919, and he went through to just before the 50s, 30 years. Made 46 films, primarily in the 30s, including, of course, The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, for which he won the Oscar. He was known for comedies. Actually, he was known for dramas. The Wizard of Oz was kind of a departure for him. Now, this fellow you may not know, but you may have heard of him. This is Elia Kazan on the right, talking to Marlon Brando, presumably on the set of either Streetcar Named Desire. I think Streetcar Named Desire. Kazan was an American stage and film actor. So he started as the actor and a stage director. He was a screenwriter. And he was a purveyor of the method, which Stanislavski had created, and brought a new realism, a new naturalism to his projects. He co-founded the Actors Studio in 1947. He was known as an actor's director. He made films with personal and social issues, such as Gentleman's Agreement, which was about anti-Semitism, Streetcar Named Desire, and East of Eden. And he so-called discovered Marlon Brando and James Dean, who we see James Dean in the center of this picture with Kazan at the right. They had come out of his actor's studio. He got 4 nominations from the Oscars. He won twice, Best Director, and was given an honorary Life Achievement Oscar in 1999. This is Robert Altman, and he was the first director who actually was referred to specifically by the tagline, an actor's director, which is strange because he was a non-actor himself. And I believe that as a general rule, the best directors start out as actors. He began as a screenwriter. He got into movies by selling the screenplay. He worked on industrial films. He was a stage director. He was active as a director for 30 years, from the 70s through the 90s. He made 35 features, including MASH, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and Gosford Park, which was kind of a predecessor of Downton Abbey. It was also written by Julian Fellowes, the same writer as Downton Abbey. He received 5 Oscar nominations, an honorary Oscar for his body of work in 2006. He's known for satire, subversion, going against the grain of regular films, ensemble casts, overlapping dialogue, and improvisation. And if you take a look at this picture, and particularly at the cast list, at the top, you see all these star names. But it's not built around a single star, it's built around an ensemble, a group of actors. Here's an excerpt from Altman's biography in Wikipedia. And if you'll notice up there, near the top, it says, by encouraging his actors to improvise dialogue, Altman thus became known as an actor's director, a reputation that attracted many notable actors, as we saw on the poster, to work as a part of his large casts. Performers enjoyed working with Altman in part because he provides them with the freedom to develop their characters, and often after the script through improvisation and collaboration. It says, Richard Baskin says that Bob was rather extraordinary in his way of letting people do what they want. He trusted you to do what you did, and therefore you would kill for him. Geraldine Chaplin said, have you brought your scripts? He said. We said, yes. He said, well, throw them away. You don't need them. We need to know who you are and where you are and who you're with. So he sort of personified the actor's director. Now, you can do that in film. You can do method and improvisation. Not so much on stage. In film, you have to get it right once. And you can scrap the bad takes. But on stage, the actor has to put on a performance sometimes 8 times a week for weeks on end and sometimes years. And so the director's job is different for that actor. The director has to help the actor create a role that they can play over and over again. And finally, when looking for actors, directors, there's me. So I'm going to pause here for you to laugh. It takes a lot of gall to put myself in the company of those other people. I certainly haven't had as big a career, but I've had a pretty prolific one as a director. Some 140 acting credits and 40 directing credits, as it says. And here's probably my proudest piece of publicity. This is an interview with an actor with whom I did a play, a 2-character play. He says, if you'll notice the paragraph on the right-hand side below the box, talking about me, which is flattering. Bob's a really good teacher, he said about the play's director, Bob May. As nerve-wracking as it is to be in a 2-person play, he made the rehearsal so much fun, and my co-star, Jackie Gannon, and he and I would laugh a lot. And it's always nice to have someone tell you when you've done something right, not only the wrong things. And he always laughs at all the funny stuff in the play, no matter how many times he's heard it. I've been criticized for doing that, but it just tickles me every time I hear the same jokes. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I know what I know as a director, and then what I know. How I know what I know. Here's my first director's resume. I didn't have a whole lot of credits. I had quite a few credits in Mystery Dinner Theater. I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 credits at this time. So I had to pad the resume with a statement of my philosophy and my training and my non-related work experience. Now, if you'll notice, the bottommost credit under theater was a production of Bus Riley's Back in Town that I directed. That was my first directing job in 1988 in Bellflower. And here's a photo from that performance. It was a play by William Inge. Hope I got that right. It was a 1-act, and it was set in a saloon in the Southwest. My point is that before I did my first directing job, and now I'm going to move to my actor's resume, I had done something like about 100 shows for other directors. Sometimes the same ones, but frequently not. And that's how I know what I know, because I worked for all these directors. I learned how to do my job as an actor, but I also got to watch them direct and see how they did what they did and evaluate the things I thought they did well and the things that I thought they did not so well. I started out as a comedian, comic actor. Here I am as the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz in high school, my senior year. Here I am in college. I'm in the front row, right of center, in the blue tunic with the yellow tights. This is a production of The Lady's Not for Burning by Christopher Fry, which is a sort of a pseudo Shakespearean comedy, but it's been updated, kind of modern. This was a wonderful production directed by a gentleman named Jim Henderson. And why I remember this show so fondly, it was the first show where there were not a lot of arguments and histrionics and egos, and we worked as a team and we got along, and we've stayed friends ever since. The fellow behind the desk at center is Tom Todoroff, a now some 50 years later, a well-known, renowned drama teacher in New York. And then this is finally a screen grab from a video project that I did in 2022. Not as much hair, where I played Editor Webb in Our Town in a video for the Anaheim Public Library on towns. So what did I learn as an actor? It's important to me that my acting experience preceded my directing experience. I learned I didn't like to be yelled at. I didn't like directors yelling. I didn't like hanging around and waiting with nothing to do. I didn't like memorizing because it's hard, especially Shakespeare. And I didn't like Hell Week because, at least in my day, there was this idea that they would keep you very late and work you very hard during Hell Week so that by the time you opened the show, you were exhausted and you didn't really have very much left to give. So those were lessons that I learned that helped me to evolve my list of director's tasks. Most important is putting the actors front and center. The actors are your tools. If you're a craftsman, the actors are your tools. And they also are fragile individuals because they're making themselves vulnerable and they're having to recreate very extreme emotions in front of an audience. You are responsible for each one of them, and you must help to make them into a team. If you get the right actors, this is the cast of a production of An Inspector Calls that I did in 2020. This is them backstage before the show. If you get the right actors, most of the hard work is done. And you can mold them into a team, and you can mold them along the lines of your artistic vision. So how do you do that? What are your tasks? Obviously, you read the play. In this case, I wrote a letter to a theater board with my conception of my proposal, my thoughts about a show I wanted to do. Involved sketching my idea of the stage space and how it would be used. Here's a more elaborate stage design that I asked an artist to create for me for An Inspector Calls. The play is set in a kind of a limbo, kind of a supernatural place between Earth and another dimension. So I figured I would have the outline of the room that it takes place in and the sky outside. Here we are building that set midway through the process, not lit, but here we are creating the idea of that set in a thrust space. This is the Westminster Community Theater in 2020. A thrust space is a rectangular stage configuration with seats on three sides. The audience is on three sides. So it's a little like playing in the round. You do have the back wall that you don't have to worry about sightlines for, but it's tricky and difficult, but it can be a very interesting, intimate kind of staging. This is a mid-size house, the Curtis Theater, and this is the cast bowing at the end of a show that I directed there. This is an auditorium space with thousands of seats. This is a production of Titanic, the musical, in which I appeared. That's me, right of center in the red robe. This was a huge cast of dozens, crew of dozens, and we actually made the ship sink on stage. This was at Redondo Beach Aviation Auditorium for the Civic Light Opera of South Bay Cities. This is dinner theater, where you're right up against the tables, right up against the audience. One of many different kinds of spaces that I've had to stage things in. And they're each different. They each have pros and cons. Some are more intimate. Some have very built-in problems. The first thing a director does is he or she breaks down the play. This is a page breakdown on a spreadsheet that I did for an Inspector Calls. You can see the page numbers along the left-hand side. There were some 60 pages to this show. And then the characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 characters, including the inspector, across the top. And the little X means that on that page, that actor is on stage. So here from page 6 to page 11, I've got this group of primarily 5 actors. Edna, the maid, makes a quick appearance at the beginning and then exits. And then you see my notes over to the right-hand side, where I think about how many characters I have to work with, who can I excuse, and what are the major beats. There is a long monologue where Burling makes a wedding toast in the first 6 to 11 pages. And so I break down, I know who's on stage, I know who's exiting and entering, I know what gist of the scene is, I know who I can excuse. And if you'll notice, I break down my scenes based on a reconfiguration of the number of people based on people leaving and entering. And that reformats the stage. So that makes a new scene. This play was divided into acts, not scenes. So I divided it into scenes for the purpose of rehearsals. No other real purpose. So you see on page 12, the women exit, because in the old days, after dinner, the women would walk off into another room and the men would talk. And we have the inspector entering of the title, and Inspector Calls. I then use this spreadsheet to create a scheme of scenes, or what I call call nights, so that on one night, I will call, this group here at the top: Burling, Edna, Gerald, Sheila, Mrs. Burling, and Eric, which is almost my entire cast. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think there were 7 people in this cast. And just work with them in terms of blocking and going over the scenes and reviewing those scenes. So I do not call actors who I don't need. That's just a best practice of mine. I clump them into groups in order to block and work on scenes. I build in time off for each of them, so they will have time for their lives and time to learn their part away from the theater. And then I create a schedule based on that. You'll see that I work not every day of the week. I take off, in this case, Thursday and Saturday. Most of my actors have day jobs, so it's different in equity. You can call actors during the day, but for community or civic theater. And then I also call them no earlier than 7 o'clock on a weeknight, and I use them on says Friday afternoons, but I don't think that's right. It's Sundays when I call them in mid-afternoon. We do the blocking first, middle column there. Then we do the work-throughs. Then we do the run-throughs. Then we do the dress tech. Then we have a full run and an invited performance. So I know on any given night, if you'll also notice on the notes on the right, the actors have told me when they're going to be late. I've given them a date to be off book. I've made a special rehearsal to add an actor. And there was at one point there on the March 28th when I needed a location to do the rehearsal. When an actor gives you his conflicts, when an actor is not going to be available, you need to be honest, actors, because the director and everybody else plan their schedule around your conflicts. And we can work with conflicts, except when we get into Hell Week, when we have to set lights and do technical cues. One of the things that you do as you're breaking down the script is you're also developing what's called the character breakdown. And here you can see, just looking at the top, Arthur Burley, a fairly prosperous manufacturer, 40s plus. His wife's social inferior, maybe speaks with a middle-class English regional such as Scottish accent. Author's description, rather portentous with fairly easy manners, but rather provincial in his speech. And then I've told everybody, if they get the script from Samuel French or Dramatis, that the sides I'm going to be using are pages 9 to 10 and 62 to 63. So they can prepare their audition. And this is what to use in the publicity for the audition. This is how the actors can decide if the role is right for them. And this is really important for your thinking, because you're developing such things as what age, gender, race, those kinds of things. And it helps you to create the cast in your head so that you know what you're looking for. This is a picture of my room after the final audition for a show. And these were my final choices. I had a stack of photos and resumes that had been stapled together. Photos are really helpful. They should be current. They're really helpful in allowing you to think back hours or days later. And here you see I've put them together in groups. The young boy, girl, boy, then the comedy characters below that, then the straight characters below that, and then finally, I don't know who that is down at the bottom, but these are characters for a show that I did, a British comedy that I did. And again, at the audition, it's really important that, first of all, you commit to the time, and secondarily, that you test the actor's memory. The whole point of callbacks is to give the actor a side to take away and bring home the next day a scene or a monologue where they show you that they can quickly memorize and do well. You don't want an actor who can't memorize, and unfortunately, there are several actors out there who can't memorize. You then conduct the table read, which is, of course, the time to go through and discuss issues, find out who's saying what when, and you set the tone, and you particularly begin dealing with your actors as an actor's director with respect. I am always ladies and gentlemen. I'm frequently, rather than giving a demand, I'm saying, can I get you to do me a favor? Um, and you set the rules. I have a few core rules. The main one is thou shalt not waste time. This is just an expression of my respect for them, their respect for me, and our respect for one another. Consequently, I don't countenance excuses. I don't like a lot of visiting. I like to start on time, end on time, and allow the visiting to take place after the rehearsal is over. So then the director begins to block the play. Here I have, at the top of the page, sketched out the stage picture from overhead. In the scene, Eric has just entered the room. He says, "You know, don't you?" And the inspector says, "Yes, we know." So this is a scene at the top of Act 3 where Eric has entered knowing that we know his secret, that he's gotten the girl pregnant. And I've arrayed this so that Eric is at the upstage. So this is an overhead view at the top, E for Eric, and the little dot. To his right and over is the inspector. And then the character S, I don't know who that is. I've indicated that they sit, and then Mrs. Burling. And then a character A creates a downstage triangle. And so I sketched the beginning of the what's called stage picture. Then as we go on, I indicate in my script blocking throughout the scene. You'll notice at the beginning on the line, "One night last November," Eric crosses to an upstage chair and sits. In the next line, the inspector crosses to Eric. On the line, "I began talking to her." Eric rises and makes a figure 8. We see a line further down, "No, she hasn't." Eric crosses to the inspector, and so forth and so on. And this is a traffic pattern. These are universal symbols: the figure 8, the cross, the X for cross, the arrow pointing down for sits. And here, this scene is staged. At this point, Eric has moved down from the upstage left door and is confronting Mr. Burling. His mother, the character A, is at right in this picture, and the inspector is right of Mr. Burling. And it's a pretty emotional scene. But it's the blocking that we just saw on the page transferred to the set. One of the things that we do as visual artists, as directors, we create what are called stage pictures. And they're literally that. They're pictures frequently derived from art. Here's a standard composition, artistic composition. It's a symmetrical, nicely balanced. It's 3 sets of 2 characters, mother and child, bordered on both sides by older figures in a configuration like a triangle, and then the cupids, the 2 cupids at the bottom, sort of commenting. Here's a formal symmetrical picture that I created for Inspector Calls of Mr. Burling and the fiance-to-be having a toast at the beginning. We start the play in formal compositions. And then we get into asymmetrical. This is a Degas painting in which you can see they've outlined sort of the relationships, the geometric relationships of each of the characters. Some upstage in the back, some off to the side, two figures off to the stage left side, and of course the prominent figure in profile. Here's my version of a similar composition with the father upstage and in the background, the inspector downstage. And I don't know if you can make out the triangle that I've tried to create here. This staging was thrust, so there were people on all three sides, front, right, and left. And so I tried to make a picture that could be viewed from each side and still tell the story and still be aesthetically, artistically balanced and interesting. Now here's an example of a quote, a visual quote, a stage picture quote. This is a scene from MASH, a Robert Altman film. You'll notice the big ensemble. And you'll notice that it's quoting the Last Supper. And it's doing that in the context of comedy. Here's a formal lineup that I blocked. Again, a comedy. Rarely do you want to have people just lined up in a line, but this allowed me to do a piece of comic blocking where the fellow on stage left is about to get hit in the face by the woman's arm. And I was able to put different attitudes, sort of like the Last Supper, on these characters. This is a wonderful painting by Edward Hopper, probably the best 20th century American artist. And it really expresses solitude. It divides the picture straight down the middle and has almost two separate pictures on either side of the partition in the middle. And of course, the most interesting is the one on our right of the young lady deep in meditation, who's the usher in this theater and basically just has to stand there and waste time, is contemplating. And on the other side of the partition, on the left side of the partition, you have the audience watching the movie screen. And you'll notice that we've tied the orange color in as an accent on both sides of the partition. This is an isolation. The character, the usher, is isolated to one side and balances the whole rest of the picture, which is just basically filled in space. I did an isolation for a production of Dial M for Murder, where one character is trying to talk the other character into killing his wife. And I decided to isolate them in a spotlight on a bare stage. So this is, again, you know, I was using visual incidents of isolation that I'd seen, and I'm recreating it for the stage picture. Now, when I take notes, I hold the script in front of me and I follow it along and I move my eyes up and down between the script and the action that is taking place on stage. And when something happens that I want to make a note on, rather than writing a note in the dark, this is a best practice that I've found, I put an X on the right margin. You can see it there. The first one is where Margot says no. Hubbard, the detective, picks up the attaché case, shows it to her. Your husband has explained this. You can tell us about it now. But Margot stares. Hubbard, the inspector, watches her face. And I made another mark. And later, when I go to give notes after the rehearsal, I will go through my script. I will come to the check mark and I will rely on myself to remember what it was I wanted to say about that particular moment. If I don't, it'll come to me later, but I'll say, well, it must have been a compliment, so as not to make too big a deal about it. But and then when I've given the note, I erase the X, and if I put the X there the next time we go through the scene, they haven't obviously taken the note. Just as a rule of thumb, there's a rule of three. I will, in each rehearsal, I will do the scene 3 times, whether we're blocking it or reviewing it. Certainly when we get into running the scenes later, of course, when we run the acts, we can't do it 3 times in a night, but up until we begin to run the acts, I review the scene 3 times, and I will give a note 3 times. And if the actor doesn't take the note, I just assume they're not going to take it. And I either live with it or make some sort of an adjustment. Some of the things that I do to try to clean up the performance are that when we are reviewing, it's okay to paraphrase the first few times, but then we sit right down and we read the text. And so I don't let the actors paraphrase after, I would say, the 3rd time we run through. I want to hear the words the way the author wrote them. In Hell Week, I take an entirely different approach to notes. I type them and email them to the actors, or alternatively, I print them and put them on the bulletin board. These are the notes. You can see that I've timed the acts, and I've commented, thank you for taking 17 minutes off. Keep it up, but don't relax. Stay in the moment. And then I've given individual notes, either to everyone or to individuals. My note to Nigel at the bottom there, now that I can hear and understand all the words, it becomes realer and more likable. Thank you. The serious moments are great. The exit in Act 1, Scene 2 is great. On Hell Week, I like to excuse the actors as soon as the rehearsal, as soon as the run-through is over. They need to go home and get some rest. I don't like keeping them late. I learned that when I was an actor. And if possible, I try to give them the night off before the opening preview, because I'd rather have them arrive fresh and a little nervous, and I want them to save it for when the audience is there. Now, a little bit about the difference between film and stage directing. As I pointed out, the stage director's task is to prepare the actor to repeat the performance over and over as though it were for the first time. The film director's challenge is to get the actor to do it once. And so you have kind of a different job. One of the things that a film director does is establish visual orientation. For example, in this scene from Banshees of Inisherin, written and directed by Martin McDonagh, we're on the Irish coast in front of a pub. And Colin Farrell on the left is talking to Brendan Gleeson on the right. And although you're not really conscious of it, McDonagh has created a proscenium, just like a proscenium stage, by the placement of his camera. And he is orienting the audience to who's sitting on the left, who's sitting on the right. And he's placing the audience in front of these 2 characters, with the Colin character to the stage right side and the Brendan Gleeson character to the stage left side. If this is creating what's called an axis, something that's unique to film. It can't happen in a stage situation. And if the cinematographer crosses the axis to the other side, all of a sudden the audience is very disoriented because now it looks like the actors have magically changed from left to right. So you don't want to do that unless you, as a film director, can do it in a continuous take. In other words, circling around the actors so as to keep the audience oriented as to the relative spacing. And another way you can do that is with a series of cuts that slowly move from one side of the axis to the other. You can move into one shots instead of this two shot. You can move into right angles over the shoulder shots that allow you to move the camera on the other side. And this is because the audience is conditioned by a lot of their previous experience. In this case, and this is a common scene in Westerns, we've got the stage, not the stagecoach, we've got the covered wagons coming across the prairie. And they're moving, they start on the right side of the screen and they move to the left side of the screen. Why? Well, it's because we all know that the United States, the migration of the Western pioneers was from the east to the west, that is from the right to the left. And since that's in our mind, the director can use that movement from right to left to tell the audience that the pioneers are coming west. This, flipping it, makes it look like they're in retreat. And the audience may not consciously be thinking that, but again, it's just like the two characters. You can get away with this by beginning on the right-hand side with the stagecoaches heading, or the wagons heading to the left, and then gradually move around them so that the audience stays oriented. In this case, we see a plane coming in from the right to the left, and we interpret this as coming east to west. But if you look at and try to read the writing, you can see that we flipped this picture, and in fact, plane is heading from the west to the east. These kind of cues are also something that can be used on stage because, again, our tradition in the West is to read from left to right and top to bottom. And that's how we've been programmed to scan with our eyes. So you as a director frequently have people entering from stage right or the left-hand side of the stage from the audience's point of view, just because that's kind of a way of saying once upon a time, or here we begin, and we're coming from where you're used to looking when you read. That's the way our eyes scan. I, as a director, can use this trick if I want the audience not to see something. If I want to do a magic trick and I want to divert them, I will make them look to the left, the extreme left, where the big O from once is, and hide whatever it is I don't want them to see down in the lower left. So that's just an application of this idea to the stage. Finally, returning to actors, just a little word to the wise. In every actor, there lives a tiger, pig, an ass, and a nightingale. And you just never know which one's going to show up. And that's true, because they have all those different sides to their personality. So my last pieces of advice to the director to be, or I think it's a good idea to have been an actor. I think it's important to watch other people act, other people direct. I think you learn by doing. Reading and researching is important, but you learn by doing, and of course, making mistakes. You do study, you study your craft by seeing other work and by reading. You get known by being an actor who gains the responsibility of being responsible. You go to where the jobs are. If you want the big jobs, there's just no avoiding having to go to the coasts, having to go to Hollywood, having to go to New York. They make a lot of films now in Atlanta. If you're looking for the big jobs. Now, there are jobs in theater and film in almost every local community across the country. So that's part of your decision when you're thinking about your career. You get known by volunteering. You're going to do a lot of work for free for a long time. You work hard, you sacrifice, you use the opportunity of work to network. You show that you care for your actors, you care for the piece, you care for the show, you care for your own reputation. Goodness knows you persevere, because there's nothing in show business quite as certain as rejection. I don't want to leave you on a sad note, but it takes a lot of failing. You kiss a lot of frogs before you find the prince. Well, thanks for your attention. I hope this has been an introduction to directing, and particularly directing with an emphasis on getting the best performance out of your actors. They're at the center of your work. Thank you.